Welcome to my bargain bike farm in beautiful, semi-sunny Liguria, Italy. At this bike farm, we're building a test centre to create the most independent bike reviews online, crowdfunded by you guys. We're also building a community. The community started. We've got a mechanic and workshop in the garage, Matthias. We've now got a filmer behind the lens. And now we can finally get into the first bike farm bike review of this Radon Render. When I got this bike last year, I was homeless in my camper van living in Switzerland. So it's mostly been ridden on some really gnarly Verlaisian single tracks. Since then, it's been a little bit redundant, left in the back of the garage while we've been getting on with other more interesting projects and working on the farm. Since last year, we have fixed the terrible or unacceptable brake bleed. This is a direct sale brand and it came with nowhere near enough oil in the brakes or a correct bleed. And this is a back brake on full power. And this was really dangerous the first time I ride it, and to me that's big red flag, unacceptable, fail from Radon. And the front brake's not any better. Slightly better. Oh, oh my god, that is just sheet ice. Holy shit, ice. So the brakes have been bled properly, now they're working fine. I also bent the rear rotor on a big Swiss rock somewhere. And I hate having brake mounts to get bigger rotor sizes. I think the caliper should be bolted directly to the frame. So we chose a 180 rotor, now the caliper's bolted directly to the frame and that little niggling issue sorted. So far that's all the tuning we've done to this bike, but there's a lot more tuning to come in the future videos. For this video, we're going to get stuck into the riding, characteristics of it, what's good and bad, as standard as it came from the factory. One benefit of buying your own bike park is you can build ridiculously impossible hill climbs, but despite the difficulty, the Render is a pretty good climber. The anti-squat's about 80% in the easier gears. It's not the gold standard 100%, but it's 80%, it's pretty close. And it's not as important on an e-bike to get 100% anti-squat because of the way the power gets delivered through the cranks. So the way the power is delivered on an acoustic bike is by people mashing up and down on the pedals, which you need a good anti-squat figure for. But on an e-bike, it adds power to the power that you put into the pedals and then outputs this power through the motor and the chainring, which gives a much smoother power delivery. So the electric bike anti-squat number is less important. And of course, the e-bike simply climbs better because it's got an engine to give you way more power. And because you have more power, you're way less interested in saving every fraction of efficiency you can because you've got weak, pathetic human legs with no horsepower. And the geometry for climbing on this bike is pretty good. The seat angle could be steeper. It's about 75, so not too steep. But the chainstay is pretty long, 459mm chainstay. A longer chainstay gets the back wheel further away from you and prevents your front wheel lifting. A little bit like hill climb motorbikes that have a super long chainstay, or drag cars that have a wheelie bar out the back. This added mass from the battery and the motor on the e-bike can reduce your ground clearance under the BB compared to a normal bike. There's just a lot more stuff here closer to the ground, so higher BB helps clearance. On the e-bike you could or should be doing more technical climbing, and also the speed is much higher on the e-bike, which makes pedal timing and pedal clearance more difficult. You're going faster, the cadence can be higher, and you're desperate to keep the motor engaged by pedalling to keep the power driving the rear wheel. And the steeper and more technical the climbs get, the more you want to carry that momentum up. So compared to an acoustic bike, it's much harder to time your pedals and your pedalling to keep your momentum going up climbs. Higher BB makes life easier. This Radon Render, it's all sounding pretty positive so far, but the problems start when you want to try to do some real mountain biking and start riding down stuff like this, which is my misspent summers test track at the bike farm, which is bloody difficult. To me, real mountain biking is riding over rocks, roots, jumps, berms, all that good stuff, all the fun stuff that we like to do. This Radon is sold as an enduro bike, and 1 hour away is Finale Ligure, which is the mecca, the home of enduro in Europe and the world. But the problems start when you take this bike to that kind of trail, it just can't keep up. I think the bike design and the bike setup should be prioritised towards this kind of riding. Bike parks, jumps, rocks, roots, Finale Ligure, enduro trails. The uphill part of it and the trail riding, anything else, is simply a result of having a good setup for the downhill stuff that I just described. So not only is it the fun part, it's also the most dangerous, extreme part of the riding. So you want the bike to perform its best and the most safest at the important and most dangerous parts of the ride. The uphill and the flat riding is less important. The priority of the design and setup of the bike should be on that hard, dangerous stuff. The performance on the flat or the trail is secondary, and it's basically a result of the main setup. On paper, the Render should be really good at this kind of riding. It's got relatively modern geometry. It's got an orange and gold fork with blue bits, which must be amazing for enduro, surely. But there's a number of factors on this bike that added together make it very difficult to descend and not very safe to descend, in my opinion, compared to its other competitors, and especially compared to the super bikes we've got in the garage, which are exceptionally good handling trail and downhill bikes.
Nice.
Oh my God. Oh my God, this is terrifying. Oh, you have to lean so far back there. So this track is quite an extreme example of a track. It's bloody steep and gnarly, but this section is steep, but this hole here isn't particularly big. But you can see on the camera, and you can see from the O-ring, I'm nearly bottomed out the fork. I'm gonna say that's 150 travel out of 160. But the fork set up firm, 15% sag from Fox's recommendations, not 20%, which is plush. The damping's factory settings, everything's factory settings, the 3 tokens in the fork. But the first, most of the travel, there's no support. The damping's not slowing it down, and the air spring's not supporting you. And at the end, there's like a big ramp up. And you can feel it hitting like the wall of progression created by the air spring and the tokens. And I don't think hitting something that hard, going that speed, not very fast, leaning back a lot to overcome the geometry problems, way too much travel on that bump because it's nearly bottomed out. And it was nowhere near the limits of the force that I could handle. If I hit a bump closer to the limits of the force I can handle, that would have been a complete bottom out. So overall, I just don't think the fork can handle even this kind of riding, which isn't that extreme. And when you take it to somewhere more extreme, then you really start to struggle. This fork is pathetic. Pathetic? Yeah, that's the right word at the moment. So we didn't plan this clip, obviously, we just got back into the garage. But one interesting thing is the bar height on the Orange and the Radon are about the same, but the Orange has got more travel and uses a higher percentage of sag. So the actual ride height of the bar is definitely going to be lower than the Radon. But the Radon makes you lean back way more on the steep stuff than the Orange. The Orange, I can ride it much more in the centre and I don't have to move my weight backwards. On the Radon, you have to get your weight back loads to go down anything steep or to brake, and you don't need to on the Orange. So back in the bar now, there's 4 problems with this bike that make it difficult to ride downhill. So the medium and the large Renders come with a 40mm stem. That's absolutely fine for mountain biking, in my opinion. Anywhere from 30 to 50mm is a good length. You don't want to be over 50. The extra large bike comes with a 60mm stem. And I think using a longer stem is an old-fashioned way from road biking and XC riding to fit the bike better to taller riders. But for proper mountain biking, the stem length should be used for the bike handling and control. And if you need a longer frame size for taller riders, the frame has to get longer, not the stem. Making the stem longer causes other problems that we don't need. In this case, the extra large has got a 60mm stem. So if we put this BTR trail tool that we built the trails with, and the guys that are making the new links and dropouts from our custom built common cell, which is coming soon, that'll be very interesting. If we use a BTR tough rake, say that's at the contact patch and the handle is level with the grip. This is just approximate to show you what I'm talking about. As this angle comes back 20mm with a shorter stem on the medium and large versions, you're getting a better effective head angle. The actual head angle is the same, but the angle from your grips to your contact patch on the floor is steeper on the extra large by maybe a degree, half a degree. So that's bad news, and that's the first part of why this bike's hard to descend. So if you're on the extra large bike, instant disadvantage from the start, and this is made worse by a taller rider has got a higher centre of gravity. So when you're going downhill and trying to brake or slow down, your weight's trying to go this way, and as that gets higher and this wheel gets closer to you, that angle and the risk of going over the bars, the risk of going over the bars is just increasing massively at this point. So the tall guys, instant disadvantage, stem's too long, our centre of gravity is higher, we're more likely to go over the bars. And the second problem is the head angle is too steep on this bike. It's 65 on paper, it feels a lot steeper. The other bikes downstairs are 61, 62, 63 maximum, I think, on any of the bikes. So for a tall rider, riding proper enduro stuff in Finale, this is too steep. We're not in a particularly steep situation here, and you can see the fork's nearly vertical already, and we're not braking, we're not hitting bumps, we're not doing anything, and we're already nearly over the bars. So yeah, second problem, the head angle is too steep, end of story. So problem 1, stem's too long. Problem 2, head angle's too steep. Problem 3 is the suspension fork. It's very hard to get from anybody solid data on this suspension, but to me, it feels like the air spring is way too progressive. So the middle of the travel is hollow or doesn't have any support, and also the damper appears to have very little support, and we know the Grip 2 damper has got quite a low level of compression damping compared to previous dampers, and I believe, and again I can't prove this and there's no information about it, the Fit 4 damper has less damping than the Grip 2, and the e-bike tune of the Fit 4 has even less damping force than the normal Fit 4, which has less than the Grip 2, which has less than all the previous Fox forks. There's also millions of combinations of this fork, from the leg length, the travel, the damper type, the air spring length, lots of different things. So if you look on the Fox website where they've got this perfect curve on the graph with no numbers to check it against, doesn't necessarily mean your Fox 36 has the same graph as the 36 they've measured for their advertising purposes. But in this case, it's just too soft. There's just no support, there's no damping support. And this massively makes this descending problem worse because your hands are too far over the front, the head angle's too steep, then the fork's too soft with factory settings, 90 psi, 15% sag. It's too soft, it's way too soft. I can nearly bottom it out just on this really unstable setup we've got here. I can nearly bottom it out. And if you're going down a hill on the brakes, hitting bumps, this gets much worse and causes you serious problems when it comes to the handling and the safety of the bike, which takes us on to the fourth problem. And the fourth problem is really complicated. So the next addition to this problem is the low anti-rise number. This bike has a Horse FSR rear end, which should give you fully active braking. The anti-rise is about 50% on paper, according to Andre XCR's report for this bike, which I paid for, and you can go to my website and you can read it for free. I paid €40 for it, but we're going to get all the bikes analysed, and you guys can go and check this out for free on my blog section of the website. Andre's report says the bike's got 50% anti-rise, approximately, all the way through the travel. In theory, this means you get free suspension movement that's not affected by the brake, and there's not much effect from the braking torque on the angle of the mainframe as you're slowing down when you're braking. We're going to go into this into more detail in future videos. This bike's got 50% anti-rise, so when you brake, The brake torque is allowing the suspension to move freely, but it's also allowing the main frame to pitch more forward. So if you ride down the road on the bike, pull the rear brake, you can even see the rear shock extending. So now we're going down the hill, stem's too long, the head angle's too steep, fork's too soft, and we've got a low anti-rise number to have active suspension. But in reality, this means as you're slowing down, and the heavier you are, and the taller you are, and the faster you're slowing down from, the more pitch, again, you get forward, and the more the rear suspension will extend. Again, all pitching you forward, all making life difficult. Why are all these things combined together a problem, and why do they make it more difficult to ride? You're riding down a steep hill, you've got all these problems, then there's a big hole or a big bump or a step, a drop. And you can't ride down the step or the drop being this far over the front of the bike, otherwise you'll flip over the bars, which I'm sure a lot of us have experienced, and going over the bars is the worst thing that can happen on the bike. So you instantly start to lean back to prevent this pitching forward over the bars feeling. But then when you're leaning back, there's less weight on your front wheel, and then you can use the front brake less to slow down, and the front brake is the brake that slows you down the most. So if you're leaning back, you can't weight the front brake as much as you want. Then you have to use the rear brake more, which can make the brake effect on the suspension even worse. The low anti-rise number for the rear brake, in a perfect world, it will help you have more grip because your suspension is not being affected by the brake. In this situation, it's making it worse, and we'd be better off with more anti-rise. Like 100% is the ideal world, because that stops the chassis pitching forwards. Basically, all those factors together make it hard to ride, make you have to lean back, and then you're leaning back, you're out of position, you can't absorb bumps properly, you've got no grip on your front wheel, you're in this weak position, the tyre might be hitting you in the ass, or there's all things going wrong. In a perfect world, if the bike and the suspension was set up perfectly for you and the trail that you're riding, you'd be able to brake as hard as you can and not lean back. And then you're centralised on the bike in a strong position. You're not compensating for the bike, so you can use all your skill and strength and energy to handle the bike properly instead of using different techniques to overcome the problems of the bike, like leaning back. Ideally, you stay in the middle of the bike, you can brake as hard as you can, and you're not going over the bars, and the chassis is stable the whole time. So yeah, all those things together, the bike's pitching forward, and it's hard to ride, and I'm an experienced rider, and I really struggle on this bike, and then I can get onto one of my other bikes and I'm instantly feeling more comfortable on exactly the same trails. So this is what we need to fix next. So the next part of the review, we're going to look at cornering, jumping, all the other handling aspects of the bike. But I think these problems described here are so extreme, there's no point in talking about any of the rest of the stuff, because we can't get the basics of the setup right for me to ride it properly in the way I want to ride it on the trails that I want to ride. So the next part of the review, we should be talking about cornering, jumping, the minutiae of how the suspension's working, all these different things that you get in a normal bike review. But I think on this bike, the problems with it for me, on the trails that I ride, how I want to ride it for enduro riding, we've got to solve this problem first before moving on to any of the other problems. If we try to tune the bike for cornering or jumping or anything now, it's like banging your head against a brick wall because you haven't solved the main issue and the thing that makes the bike difficult and dangerous to ride, in my opinion. We've got to solve that first before we can move on to any more parts of the review. So I'm not giving up easily. I've already done loads and loads of testing on this bike that's not been documented, but we're moving on. We're at the bike farm, we're getting things moved forward. So the next plan with the Radon is to sort out the easy problems and then the more difficult ones. So we're going to go to the part 1 of the render review, which you can see here, where we found multiple problems with the bike that just made it not that easy to ride. So we're going to sort out the shifter placement, the computer placement, shorter stem, higher bar, angle set to try and sort out the front of the bike. We're going to replace the rear tyre, we're going to add a condom insert for a better climbing grip, and replace the rim because we've got a broken spoke and a few dings. So the rim's going to get replaced. We've already changed the rear rotor, brakes are bled. We're going to improve the waterproofing on the down tube guard. And the major thing, we're going to take the suspension off and ship it to Tyrone in Tuscany. He's an expert with this suspension, but he's already said we're not going to be able to get the performance I'm asking for from these units. But he's going to do his best. He's going to tune it, size the bushings, different oil, different shim stacks. He's going to do his best to get the best performance out of this bike before we give it away in a competition soon. So like, subscribe, share with your friends, all the usual stuff. Keep an eye on the channel for the next video where we're really going to try and get the maximum potential performance out of this bike. It's almost good, it's almost a half decent bike, but all these little problems are making it a pretty crappy bike that I never want to ride. But hopefully with my knowledge, Matt's knowledge, Tyrone's knowledge, we can get this into a much better product, more fun, easier to ride, safer, faster, all that stuff. In the meantime, we've got loads of other cool stuff coming up. The garage is ridiculous. We've got the Sun Radical Plus, the old new common cell with all Nigel suspension on it. That's an unbelievable bike. We've got the custom tuned Orange 329, again, all custom tuned suspension, dropper post, upgraded brakes, seat adjust angle thing from Anomaly. That bike's had loads of work. We've also got the new old Supreme, which I'm getting custom links, custom dropouts made from BTR, who made the trail tool. And this bike's gonna get transformed into something very special. Lots of gold, lots of silver, lots of carbon, probably 15 grand price tag. Hopefully less than 15 grand. But this is gonna be a very special bike. And yeah, we got the custom dirt jumper. Hopefully soon we're gonna hit some pump tracks and some dirt jumps on that thing. Yeah, that's it. Thanks for tuning in. Hope you enjoyed it and see you next time.